The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseWare continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or to view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseWare at ocw.mit.edu.
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Malone. I'm a professor at the Sloan School and director of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. And it is my job to welcome you here today and to introduce our speaker. I actually have an even more exciting announcement for you, which is you thought you were going to come for an interesting, exciting talk, but you're actually here for an adventure. Because it turns out that apparently the power is out in all of Cambridge. The lights you see here are from the emergency power system in this building, but we do not have regular power, and therefore the speaker will not be able to use his slides and video and all the wonderful multimedia material he had prepared for you. So we get to have an old-fashioned adventure just listening to each other talk. So to prepare you for that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. I talked to him a little bit just before this, and neither of us has had a clear memory of this. But I do remember talking to Don over 30 years ago when I was a researcher at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, Xerox Park, and he was a researcher at Bell Northern Research. I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember thinking it was interesting, whatever it was. And then, after he was at Bell Northern Research, I actually found one of his bios on the web, which said, after 3 years at Bell Northern, Tapscott left to pursue other interests. Now, that's usually not a very good thing to say about someone. But in this case, the next sentence says, he founded and sold a few successful companies and wrote 14 books, including bestsellers Paradigm Shift, Wikinomics, which, by the way, I use as reading in one of my courses on organizational design, and almost most recently, his new book, Macrowikinomics, which is, I believe, for sale there at the back of the room. He just told me this afternoon that that's not his newest book. Apparently, his newest book is not a book. It is an app, the Don Tapscott app, New Solutions for a Connected Planet. In addition to all these books, Don was also named one of the Thinkers 50 definitive list of top business thinkers in the world. Macroeconomics was a runner-up for the best business book of the last 2 years. He's a member of the World Economic Forum, an adjunct professor of management at the Rotman School of Management in Toronto, Martin Prosperity Institute Fellow. He is, I believe, it's fair to say, one of the most prolific, profound, and influential thinkers about, in the world today, about the digital revolution and what it means for all of us. It's my pleasure to introduce Don Tapscott.
Thanks, Tom, for that two-time introduction. Well, they say power corrupts, PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. So I guess we will have a conversation. I'm trying to remember what we talked about too, but we were both trying to figure out how computers connected to networks might have an impact on the world. And back then, some of you may not have been around, but computers were only in the late 70s when I started DNR, were used by programmers. They weren't even used by secretaries. Word processing was just starting to appear. And we had this crazy idea that at DNR, that computers might become a communications tool and they might be used by everybody. And so we did a controlled experiment. We had 50 knowledge workers, as we call them, using multifunction workstations, pretty much Microsoft Office running on a BT100 dumb terminal from DEC. And then we had 50 people who were the control group, and they had pens and papers and secretaries and calculators and all that traditional stuff. And we found out that the test group actually worked very differently. They communicated differently, and on the measures that we had, they performed better, and they had more fun too. And within only 25 years, people were watching cat videos on there. But I wrote a book based on that experience. in 1981, and I'll say it was a study in bad timing. It did not sell very well, and I think my mom bought most of the copies. And people said, this will never happen. Regular people will never use computers. And do you know the reason? Regular people, what they said?
Typing.
Yes. Managers, professionals will never learn to type. So all these profundities became reduced to typing proficiency. I became a typing evangelist. Typing is fun. But flash forward to today, this of course is happening. So what I think I'll do, rather than talking for an hour without slides, I'm going to talk for a lot less and kind of cover the turf that I was going to cover. And then we can throw it open and have a conversation. There are a few people in this room who actually have some knowledge about the web and other things themselves. So where do we start? Well, Wikinomics. That was actually my 12th book, 2007. And it argued that the internet and the web are not about eyeball stickiness, clicks, page views, hooking up online, .coms, any of that. They're becoming a new computational platform that radically drops transaction and collaboration costs in our economy and in society. And this, we argued, is leading to a profound change in the deep structure and architecture of the corporation, of how we orchestrate capability, to innovate, to create goods and services, to engage with the rest of the world. Because talent and uniquely qualified minds can be outside the boundaries of your company. And this unfolds in all kinds of new business models. Ideagores, which are open markets for uniquely qualified minds. Prosumers, turning your consumers into producers. Open platforms, where you open up the APIs of your business and the world co-innovates on top of that. Peer production. These are all new models that are emerging in a very powerful way. And the book was a big deal. It was actually the best-selling management book for the year in the US in 2007. And then something happened that caused me to recalibrate. And that was the financial meltdown. And it's, who imagined 5 years ago that one of the big themes of business books and cover stories on magazines and so on would be how to save capitalism. Is capitalism even savable? And these books are not being written by Occupy types, they're being written by a capitalist. Matthew Bishop, business editor of The Economist, wrote a book called The Road from Ruin. And some of you may know this guy, Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize winning economist, controversial guy, writes the New York Times. He and I have been on the same stage a few times recently. And you may know his point that when you have the meltdown of a financial industry, you get a prolonged period of slump. Japan had one in '92. They're still in a slump. So get ready for a couple of decades of ugliness, he says, in the global economy. And that's the good news scenario, because some really bad things can happen. Like, say, Italy or Spain defaults on its sovereign debt, Angela Merkel, and Germany doesn't backstop the euro. Europe goes into a depression, the global economy goes into a depression. So I get up on the stage and I look out at this audience and all these people in a fetal position. And I say, look, far be it from me to debate a Nobel Prize winning economist, but to me, the future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future than the one that Krugman outlines. But if we're going to do that, we need to know what the problem is. And the problem doesn't fall within the paradigm or the mental model of traditional economists who worry about things like the business cycle. And do we need more austerity or more fiscal stimulation? And in the UK, is this a double dip, recession and so on? These are all important topics, but fundamentally, to me, this is not a cyclical change that we're going through. It's a secular change. It's a turning point in history. You add all these things up all around the world, and there's a case to be made that the industrial age has finally run out of gas. I mean, you look around, and there are a set of institutions, in macroeconomics, we talk about 16 of them, that are at various stages of being stalled or frozen or atrophied or even failing, contrasted with these sparkling new initiatives of a new model of that institution being built around the web and being built around a new set of principles. And you know, the old industrial age model of innovation in the corporation, typified by General Motors. Well, GM went bankrupt. The financial industry, I gave a talk called TEDx Wall Street at the New York Stock Exchange. It was actually the opening speech. And I said, you know, Wall Street, we have a problem. There's a growing understanding that the world is becoming less fair, less prosperous, and less sustainable. And you're at the heart of this problem. Your core modus operandi almost brought down global capitalism. Have you changed? Newspapers are going bankrupt. 70 have gone under in the United States. It'd be a fun little mass collaboration thing. In what year will the last newspaper get published in an OECD country? You know, in 30 or so developed countries. I'm guessing sometime in the 2030 range. As one youngster said to us, if the news is important, it will find me. And actually interviewed a youngster in front of a big audience. She's 20 years old. It's at the World Congress on IT. It's like 7,000 people. And I had a panel of young people. And I said to her, I bet you're part of the dumbest generation. It's the title of a book. This guy, Mark Bearline, says, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future. Don't trust anyone under 30, he says. So I said to her, her name is Rahaf Harfouch. She was studying in Syria, born in Syria, studying in Paris. Her boyfriend is in Toronto. They turn on video Skype all day long to keep their relationship going. They cook across the Atlantic Ocean. So on. So I said, and she met him on the internet. They're now married. I said, isn't that weird meeting your boyfriend on the internet? And she said, no, it's great. It's like shopping. And so I said to her, aren't you part of the dumbest generation? I bet you probably know who won American Idol, but you don't know who's the vice president of the United States. I bet you don't read the newspaper. You probably don't watch the TV news. You probably get your news from Jon Stewart and The Daily Show on Comedy Central. And like I knew her, and I kind of knew that that was not true. But she says, well, I don't think that's a fair stereotype. I mean, I think I'm informed, and most of my friends are, but you're right, Mr. Tapscott. I don't read the newspaper, but have you ever seen those things? They come out once a day. And they don't have hot links, they're not multimedia, and you get this weird black stuff on your fingers. She says, let me tell you how I get informed. She describes how she curates this environment. She says, you're also right. I don't watch the television news, but does anybody? Sam Donaldson told me the average age of the ABC Nightly News is 64. And she says, and I do watch Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, but not to get the news. She says, I don't think The Daily Show would be funny unless you know the news. So this is a little vignette about the challenges that we have of informing ourselves as a society when the old models of doing that are collapsing and when there are vast new opportunities that are emerging. And for every one of these institutions, there are tough issues. I mean, you know, how do we pay journalists? How do we ensure investigative journalism and quality? How do we avoid balkanization, where we can all follow our own little point of view, and where we may end up in these little self-reinforcing echo chambers, where the purpose of information is not to inform us, but it's to give us comfort. So, but every one of these, I mean, are models of global problem solving. They came out of the Second World War in Bretton Woods, the UN, created the UN, the World Bank, and the GATT, and the WTO, and the IMF, and the G20, and the G8. Are these problems that we have in the world that are growing, are they just too hard to solve? Or maybe our state-based models of global cooperation and governments are not the appropriate model. Now, meanwhile, on that one, there are tens of millions of people participating in new things, multi-stakeholder networks. I call them global solution networks. This is the biggest project that I'm doing right now. It's a big project on how do we solve the world's problems differently. So modest little thing. So, but we can go through all of these institutions. Science, our model of science is deeply flawed in many areas. The pharmaceutical industry is a great example. They're about to fall off this thing called the patent cliff, where they're going to lose, they are losing right now, 25 to 35% of their revenue overnight. So what do? Cut back on office expenses? No. We need to change the whole model of science to embrace the internet and new models of orchestrating capability. And Andrew Whitty, bless his heart, the CEO of GlaxoSmithKline, just 2 weeks ago announced that they're going to start sharing clinical trial data. A rising tide can lift all boats. We share pre-competitive research. They should be doing that. Proof of clinical mechanism, it's called. Share comparator arm data. And why not share all kinds of clinical trial research? They have to change the whole model. So what I was going to focus on today was the issue of education. And that's another one. Both at the university and at other levels, we still largely have an industrial age model. And the industrial age was a model of a scale and a standardization. So we have mass production, mass distribution, mass marketing, mass media, mass education, where something at the center or the top pushed out standardized units to passive recipients. So you push out products, you push out television shows, you push out lectures, but they're all one size fits all, one too many, and the recipients are relatively inert. And this is reflected. I know that a lot of teachers are working hard to reinvent the schools, but still the basic model of pedagogy is I'm a teacher, I acknowledge you're a student, you don't, get ready, here it comes. And K to 12, I was just with an amazing group of business leaders and government leaders and educators in Canada this morning that's decided we're finally going to have to transform the schools, K to 12 for relevance and effectiveness for the 21st century. But the whole, this model of the lecture, well, I kind of caricaturize it. The lecture is a process whereby the notes of a lecturer go to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either. I appreciate the irony that I'm standing up here giving you a lecture. And it would have been even more so if I had my, but in this conversation, you're not going to remember about the 16 institutions or the 5 principles or the 7 business models or anything else that I may try and go over. I'm just trying to convince you of an idea, maybe get you to think differently about something. So, just one more point before I finish up on it. So all these institutions that are the old model, contrasted with new models that are emerging. I think that this is really an epochal kind of thing. And if you want to understand what's happening today, again, with respect to Krugman, you don't go back to 91 or 82 or even the Great Recession. I think you need to go back earlier. That all around the world, we had agrarian economies. The means of production, the political system was called feudalism. And knowledge was tightly concentrated in oligopolies, the church and the state. And people didn't know about things. There was no concept of progress. And then along comes Johannes Gutenberg with his great invention, and over time different parts of the populations started to acquire knowledge. And when they did, the institutions of feudal agrarian society appeared to be stalled or frozen or in atrophy or even failing. It didn't make sense for the Catholic Church to be responsible for medicine when people had knowledge. It didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to be running things. So we had the parliamentary democracy, the creation of the nation state. We had these national democratic revolutions all throughout Latin America and other parts. The French Revolution, the American Revolution, that's essentially what these were. The new population, new classes rebelling against the old church and mobility, wanting to create not just nations, but a new kind of economy. And with that, we had the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. We saw the creation of science. The university really started to take off during this period. We saw the Industrial Revolution, and ultimately it was all good. It advanced our standard of living and our knowledge and quality of life, but it did come with a cost. And now, once again, to me, the technology genie is out of the bottle, only this time it's very different. The printing press gave us access to the written word. The web enables each of us to be a publisher. The printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The web gives us access not just to knowledge, but to the intelligence contained in the crania of other people on a global basis. This is not an information age. It's an age of networking of human intelligence. That's why I'm so delighted to be introduced by Tom on the question of the next step on that. Collective intelligence is probably the world's leading thinker. So this is an age of collaboration. It's about connecting crania. Now, why is all this happening? The web, ain't your daddy's internet. You know how to use social web. A new generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language. We had the first generation to grow up digital. And I started studying kids about 20 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought, my children are prodigies. And then I noticed that all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So in the mid-90s, I started working with 300 kids, and in '97, I wrote a book called Growing Up Digital. And I defined the net generation, the digital divide, the generation gap, a whole bunch of other ideas. And I said, these kids are going to have no fear of technology because it's not technology to them, it's like the air. It's like I have no fear of a refrigerator. And this is the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. I was an authority on model trains when I was 11. Today, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority on this digital revolution that's, changing business, commerce, government, learning, finance, education, every institution in society. So it's not a generation gap. That's what we had in the 60s. Kids and parents get along really well today. We interviewed 11,000 young people in 10 countries, or surveyed them. Back in the 60s, I mean, my parents didn't even like the Beatles, let alone, the Doors or something. What we have today is what I call the generation laugh, where kids are laughing at their parents on the digital track. And if you have a teenager in your house, you know what I'm talking about. Who does the systems administration in your home? So this is humbling, and it's leading, this generation is the biggest ever. They're coming into the workforce, the marketplace, into society, and they're different. I'd be happy to talk about that, because we did a really big project. It was probably the biggest study ever of any generation. And I'm convinced they're brain. And I'd be happy to explain that why. And they're sure not the dumbest generation. All the other stereotypes about kids are net addicted, glued to the screen, losing their social skills, or the terrible youth culture, and they're violent. And, Gene Twange's got a book called Generation Me. We've created a little army of narcissists. They don't give a damn. It's a great stereotype. The problem is there's no data to support it. The data would suggest otherwise. I'd be happy to get into it. So this is leading to a social revolution as the internet drops transaction and collaboration costs, not just in business, but in society. And you know that this big debate with Malcolm Gladwell, who's familiar with that, about, he wrote an article in the New Yorker that said the revolution will not be tweeted. Some of you, yeah. But again, we can get into it if you want, but he said real social change comes from strong ties. And there may, maybe 200 million people on Facebook causes, but just because you go like doesn't mean you're changing the world. They're not activists, they're slacktivists, he says. So I got involved in the debate, and others did too, and I said, look, all ties in society that are strong begin as weak ties, with probably one exception, the relationship between a mother and her baby. That one's strong from the get-go, although even that one kind of incubates for a while. But if we can create a platform that builds weak ties and people get to come into motion, they become stronger, the connections are greater, then surely this is a powerful force or enabler for change. It was a good debate, and then reality intervened. It was settled. Reality had a name, Tunisia, and then it got another name, Egypt, and then it got another 15 names or so. And the Tunisian revolution wasn't caused by social media, it was caused by injustice. It wasn't created by social media, it was created by a new generation of young people who wanted hope and who didn't want to be treated as subjects. But the internet was really critical to this whole thing. I'd be happy to talk about that. But in ways that people don't understand. During the Tunisian revolution, snipers were killing unarmed students in the street. So the kids would take their mobile device, take a photograph, try and triangulate the location, send that to friendly military units who came in and took out the snipers. You know, you think the web's about hooking up online. Actually, for these kids, it was a tool of self-defense. Up until 8 months ago, the Syrian situation was just kind of disintegrated, but there actually were demonstrations a year ago. And what would happen is if you got injured in a demonstration, an ambulance would pick you up, you'd go into a hospital with a broken leg, and you had a good chance of coming out with a bullet in your head. So these two youngsters in their 20s created an alternative emergency healthcare system using Twitter, where you got injured, you got picked up, taken to a makeshift medical clinic, where you got medical treatment as opposed to being executed. So those are just two little vignettes of how it's not about helping people get the right placards to the right place. This is like calling wiki revolutions, where they enable people to have collective force in ways that were previously unthinkable. So the final big driver for all this is what you might call an economic or business revolution. And has anyone here heard of Ronald Coase? You know, Tom has C-O-A-S-E. Okay, well, I'll just do a sec on this. This was, what, 75 years ago now? 80 years ago. He wrote, probably more like 75, because I'm pretty sure he's still alive. He wrote a paper where he asked a deceptively simple question. He said, why does the firm exist? If Adam Smith is right, the open market's the best mechanism to determine the allocation of information, of people, of materials, and money, and so on, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? And he said, why do we all work for companies? And he said, the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. Now, he defined that very broadly. He really was talking about the cost of collaboration. He said the cost of search, this is like 75 years ago, of finding all the right information, the right people, the right whatever, in an open market, that would be totally prohibitive. So we bring that inside the boundaries of a corporation, where we have things like filing cabinets to get information and org charts to find people and so on. The transaction costs of search are lower within the boundaries. The cost of coordination, the cost of contracting, a whole bunch of things. And the big industrialists were right. The industrial age was an age of vertical integration, where we brought everything from soup to nuts within the corporation. Henry Ford had within the boundaries of the Ford Motor Company, power plant, steel mill, shipping company, glass factory. Why? Because the costs of collaboration in an open market were greater than the costs of doing things inside the boundaries of Ford. Along comes, well, early days of modern transportation, telephone, telex, facsimile, the early days of information technology, and the boundaries of corporations became more porous. Back in Paradigm Shift, I finally wrote a book that somebody read at the beginning of the 90s, but we called it the extended enterprise. And then with the internet, transaction costs dropped more in the web. And then now, transaction and collaboration costs are dropping so much that peers can come together and create value. Peers within an organization, peers in the sense of companies acting as peers rather than superiors and subordinates in the supply chain. And the crazy one is peers outside the boundaries of companies. So if you could, create an encyclopedia with 1 million people, it's 20 times bigger than Britannica in 240 languages, but according to the big Nature magazine study on scientific articles, the error rate is about the same as Britannica. mechanic. What else could you create? Could you, through peer production, could you create a computer operating system? Well, Linux is now the dominant operating system for in the world, actually. It dominates medium and large computers, and as of this year, it dominates mobile devices. It's in a commons. Social media is becoming social production. It's not about hooking up online, it's a new means of production. So, Linux announced some big new customers a while ago. Hear about that? One of them is called China. Imagine that, you're the salesperson. Hey, got a great new customer. China. A lot of users, Could you create a physical good this way? Well, the Chinese motorcycle industry has dozens of little companies that cooperate on the web. They meet in tea houses. There's no OEM. There's no Harley Davidson pulling all the strings. This is now 40% of global motorcycle production. And get ready for the $1,000 peer-produced car using the same model. So you put all that together, tie it in with the global crisis, and we now have a burning platform in all of these institutions. And so let's just say a couple words about education, and then we can throw it over. You know the burning platform idea? That you're somewhere, like on an oil rig, that's on fire, where the costs of staying where you are become greater than the cost of moving to something new, even though the new state may be unknown. And in all of these institutions, we've had a burning platform, or we now have a burning platform. Government. It was Al Gore was on this 20 years ago, the reinvention of government. You all know about that. We actually have to reinvent government today. The sovereign debt crisis in Europe, the fiscal mess in the US. We have these industrial age models of government that grew up at the same period as the industrial age corporation, where governments take tax revenue from citizens. They have all these people inside their boundaries that create public value, like services or laws. They push that back out to the citizens. Well, that will continue, but there are all these new models that are emerging now, where governments can be not simply the providers of public value, they can be the curators, so the context providers of public value. So the whole notion of government as a platform, great idea. Governments release data. Tim's huge advocate of that. I think at a TED conference, people chanted, as I remember, raw data, raw data. There's something you can get on. But, you know, and then if we simply provide raw data, you've got private companies, civil society organizations, other government agencies, academia, individual citizens who self-organize now on this platform to use that data. This is not about, you know, putting government online or paving the cow path or all the other things that we've been doing about the reinvention of government. This is the early days of a new division of labor in society about how we come together to create public value that we used to call services or laws. Now this is extended out around the world too. You know, we can now come together and do things like govern something in the world without using a state-based institution to do that. And the governance of the internet would be a great example of that. And as you may know, there's a huge showdown at the OK Corral shaping up next week in Dubai, where the old state-based institutions, institution of the WTU that regulated telecommunications in the world, sort of battling the ecosystem that governs the internet. ICANN, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the W3 Consortium, all these organizations that are multi-stakeholder networks, but they are not based on states. And they're doing a pretty good job of governing the internet with a completely different model. So the old regimes and some of these tyrannical, if you like, or despot regimes think that no, we need better governance. So there shouldn't be things like lies on the internet. And so we can fix that by having, you know, the WTU playing a more active role. So this is a battle between the old and the new that's shaping up in all of these institutions. Okay, so a couple of things about education and learning. And I say this with some humility, realizing that I'm at MIT, the home of the OpenCourseWare initiative. But to me, we have a bunch of big problems with the industrial model of learning. One is pedagogy. It's a one-to-many, one-size-fits-all model. The second is how content gets created for learning. At the post-secondary education level, I mean, how bizarre that we have thousands of statistics professors all around the world that are each developing their own little notes and PowerPoints and tests and materials and learning guides and so on to explain what an analysis of variance is. There are probably 3 or 4 best ways, and they'd be culturally specific. But the ivory tower, that term, it's not an accident that term is used. Universities were originally places to keep the books. And then smart people started hanging around, and then you started getting students to come and learn from the smart people. We have all these old insular institutions, and within them, academics that create their own thing, when we could be collaborating to create post-secondary education. The third big set of issues has to do with the relationship of the university to not just to other universities, but to other levels of education and to other institutions in society. And I think that we can make some big changes on those too. So let me just say a word about pedagogy. The model is, in the industrial age, was a teacher-focused, one-way model where the student is isolated in the learning process. Now, of course, you can try and have discussions and so on, but when you're teaching Psych 101 and there's 1,000 people in the class, it's hard to keep. So, what could we do to move towards a new model? Actually, just before I do that, let me say a couple of things. You know the whole thing about lifelong learning, we all know that concept. This is really very impactful when you think about what is the purpose of higher education. When I graduated, I was kind of set for life. I just kept up in my chosen field, or at least I thought. Today, young people graduate, you're not set for life. You're set for like, I don't know, 15 minutes. If you took a technical course in the first year, a lot of that is obsolete by the time you get to the 4th year. So, it's like your career is a milk carton. It's got a time stamp on it, and it's going to go sour unless you're reinventing. So, this means that what a university needs to do is not just to create knowledge. Now let me provoke you a bit on that one. I would say that, of course, you need mastery, especially in technical courses. And we're not going to Google everything. But the fact that we have the web now and these search engines and so on, the new technologies that are coming out, geospatiality, the semantic web and so on, that we do have this world of information that's going to be easier and easier to get access to. So Albert Einstein was interviewed, rare interview, and it was a journalist who at the end of the interview said, and I paraphrase, that was great, could I follow up with a phone call? And he said, yes. She said, may I have your telephone number? And he said, yes. And he pulled out a phone book. And he started looking up his number. And she said, and I paraphrase, what? You're the smartest man in the world, you don't know your own phone number. Einstein says, I only remember things I can't look up. So this is Eric Schmidt, the erstwhile CEO of Google, has this little aphorism where he talks about information and the growth of information. So, and I've heard different variants of this, but they're all roughly the same. He says, between the beginning of human time and the year 2003, humanity recorded 5 exabytes of information. That's a lot. An exabyte is a quintillion bytes. He says, in the last 12 hours, we recorded 5 exabytes of information. Now, a lot of that is cat videos. but a lot of it isn't. There are transactions and important, the things people with OpenCourseWare and so on. So what are we going to do? Try and get kids to stuff more of that into their heads? No. When you graduate, what's really important is your capacity to think, to solve problems, research, collaborate, put things in context, to understand the interrelationship between things. These higher order skills. And so this is a big challenge to reinvent both K-12 and universities so that these kinds of capacities can be developed. Now in 1976, I took I was doing a master's of education. And I took a graduate course in statistics. In 1976, it was all on a computer. It was connected to a machine called a PDP-1170 digital. And we had dumb terminals, and there was a slide projector that projected graphic stuff out to it. So it was multimedia. It was self-paced interactive learning, like a MOOC. I went over things I understood quickly, things I didn't understand, I went over and over again. I remember thinking, if someone saw me going over this again, they would think I'm really dumb. But nobody saw me, and I went over it till I got it. Now I got an A, but most kids did, up from a B- on the same set of standard tests 2 years earlier. And I thought, well, this is obvious, self-paced learning. There were no lectures. This statistics lecture, by definition, is a bust, right? There's no one-size-fits-all for statistics. Everyone in the lecture hall is either bored or they don't get it. But I thought, well, this is going to just take off. That was almost 40 years ago. And it's just in the last 12 months that we're seeing the rise of these new interactive learning environments that are self-paced. So you got Coursera, just a little reality check. Who knows about Coursera? Okay, you've got things like edX here at MIT with Harvard. The whole idea of the flipped classroom, where rather than studying after the class, you study before the class. You watch the lecture, you do some interactive thing. And these interactive things they don't just work for statistics, they work for anything where you have a challenge of mastery, where there's a right or wrong answer. Now, even in history, there are lots of right and wrong answers. What was about the American Revolution, the dates and what actually occurred around that. And then you come to the classroom, and that's where the interaction and collaboration and the active learning really takes place. So this is a big opportunity. And it's a time when this is finally really happening. And those of you, I know a number of you are with the OpenCourseWare board. Thank you very much, because your leadership made a real difference. Now, the second question about how does content get created, Charles Vest, again from MIT, was a real leader on that stuff, creating the notion of the meta university. And see, because with the OpenCourseWare, the first stage was really just publishing materials online. But we need to move to a couple of new stages. A second stage, and the MOOCs are driving a lot of this, is we need to have collaboration in the creation of higher learning content. We need to co-innovate post-secondary education amongst academics and content creators around the world. And a lot of this is going to be software, actually, as self-paced interactive learning becomes important. And then the next level, to me, is that you start to bring the tonic of the market to bear on every course and every situation. And value comes to the fore. Value is evidenced, like number before, because of transparency. And the really good stuff starts to have a real impact. So I'm a student, and I might have a home university, and especially I might have a campus experience somewhere, because that's still really important. Marvin Dressler, the former head of sociology at Princeton for 20 years, I was on a panel with him And we were talking about the role of campus, and he says, come on, Don, the campus is a great place for young people to go for 4 years and get older. He says they're bound to learn something while they're there. And there's a role for a campus and for a home institution, but why shouldn't we be able to study from a multiplicity of all kinds of different sources? Some of them will be other universities, some of them will be independent academics, some of them could come from other places as well. And when you start to think about that, you start to think about these walls of an iron core finally breaking down. So I have this great video I'm dying to show you, but I'm not going to be able to do it. But it's around the idea of collective intelligence. And it's something that I've been studying science, nature actually, to try and see what an age of network intelligence might look like. Because we've looked at lots of organizations, and we've learned lots. But there's a lot to be learned from nature. And there's a very spectacular thing. You can go onto YouTube and actually see the video. But it's called the murmuration. And if you type in Macrowikinomics murmuration into YouTube, you'll see it. But it's one of the most spectacular things in all of nature. And it functions according to the principles of Wikinomics, basically. It's collaboration, there's a big openness, there's a sharing of all kinds of information, not just about speed and trajectory and so on, and there are rules to govern that. Key rule would be don't bump into anybody else. But these are thousands and thousands of birds, and there's a real interdependence. Like I'm going around saying business can't succeed in a world that's failing. And this murmuration functions around that notion because one of its main purposes is to defend the birds from predators. And in these videos, you can see hawks trying to get a bird, and then the birds whirl around this violently noisy, huge black arrow that's a terrifying thing, apparently, if you're a hawk or a predator, and the hawks just get chased away. So, by the collective power of the little birds. So the idea there, and I just want to throw this out because Tom and others who think about this are here, but could we go beyond, if we were to connect ourselves on this planet through this vast network of glass and air, could we go beyond just sharing information? Or knowledge? Could we start to share our intelligence? Could we create some kind of collective intelligence, or even some kind of consciousness that extends beyond an individual or an organization or a society? If we could do that, we could solve some pretty big problems. Like, you remember the learning organization, Peter Senge, that whole idea? It never really happened. Maybe the precondition for a learning organization wasn't there. That organizations like people can't learn unless they're conscious. I mean, when I give talks, I try to tell stories and even be funny because I find people learn more when they're conscious. Maybe we need to create organizations that have consciousness before we can create learning organizations. You know, during the Egyptian revolution, a lot of people were saying Mubarak's too strong, the kids are going to give up, they'll go home. And I knew at the time, and I wrote about this, I don't think they will. Because if they go home, if they break up that collective, then he'll hunt them down individually, and he'll kill them. So, for sure, all of the leadership will probably level down, maybe a few of their families as well. So they had to kind of stay together like the murmuration. If it breaks up, then the predators are going to have a field day with these birds. So, just to recap, some big drivers: technology, demographics, economic, and social, leading to new models of most of our institutions, going away from an industrial model to a collaborative model where we network human intelligence. And where, yeah, this is a time of great danger and peril, but it's fundamentally a time, to me, of a big opportunity to create all kinds of new wealth, new value, new prosperity, and new social justice, and maybe even creating a smaller world that our kids inherit that's a better one. So I'm going to stop it there, and then just let's, we can talk about any of that. I've covered it all. Yeah.
So, speaking of hyperbolic, what are your thoughts, if any, around Kurzweil's writings around the singularity? You talked about collective intelligence, it sort of starts to touch on some of the things he has written about. You read his work, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm just reading his new book, which is not yet published. I'm doing a review of his new book about changing the way we think. And so far it seems to be pretty interesting because we have to design our models. Especially important for kids because a third of the human brain gets built during extended adolescence, age 8 to 18. And the number one variable determining what your brain is like, the synaptic connections of your brain, is how you spend your time after your teenage. And my generation, the baby boomers, grew up, we watched TV 24 hours a week. And so we were the passive recipients of somebody else's video. And the industrial model, right? And I was cool with that. Like, for a long time, I was cool with being a passive recipient. I was broadcast to on TV, and my parents, you know, the baby boomer family, father knows best. It was a one-way kind of transition. I describe this as the baby boomer family had an org chart. You know, mom reported to dad, the kids reported to mom. And that's, of course, but I went to school and I was broadcast to, and I went to the church every Sunday, and I got broadcast to, and I went into the workforce. And initially, I had a boss telling me what to do. But kids today are growing up in a very different kind of environment. And they come home and they don't turn on the TV, they turn on their computer. They're in 3 different windows, and they got 3 magazines open, they're listening to iTunes and texting, and they got a video game. Oh yeah, and they're doing their homework. But the TV is sort of like ambient media, it's like music. And this is affecting brain development in all kinds of ways. So we need to think about designing our children's brains, or helping them design a good brain, but it's also true for us as well. Brain plasticity now is a big theme. Now it's not like adolescence, where you're actually building a third of the brain. This is, you have a brain, but they can change. You know that famous meme about London bus drivers, that the taxi drivers have a bigger part of the frontal cortex responsible for memory than taxi drivers, because they have to remember the map of London. You ever gotten a taxi cab in London? I did this recently. I'm going to one Whifflepot Lane. It was this little tiny block, and I Googled it because I knew I was going to have to explain where this was. The guy goes, "Roy," and off he goes. So if it's true that we have brain plasticity, there are probably all kinds of things that we could do to actually design our minds. Now, so that's kind of what his new book is exploring. On the singularity, you know, these are interesting ideas. Some of it I don't buy. Personally, I don't want to live to be 150 and watch all my less affluent friends and families die off. So the whole thing, if you can stay alive for another 30 years, then we can start implanting all kinds of devices in us. But that's a social opinion, and it's a personal opinion. But obviously, he's made an important contribution to a bunch of this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I often like being provocative too. So I'll make an analogy. If you look at global climate change and global warming, you know, you could look at it as great opportunities, right? If you're in Canada, it gets warmer. If you're in a desert, you might get water. There's lots of places where you can say it could be much better, but there's a lot of places where it could get a lot worse. And if we're at a sort of real changing point, you seem nicely focused on places where it could get better, but I don't get a sense that you're capturing that, like, there's change all over the place, and a lot of change could be a lot worse.
Okay, well, let me pick up two sides of that. First of all, let me talk about climate change.
Okay.
Because I am from Canada. And last summer we had this beautiful, hot, sunny summer. It was just wonderful. And I remember saying to a friend, you know, this whole climate change just could be really cool if it wasn't for the fact that 1.5 billion people are going to lose half their water supply in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
So I agree with you completely. So, of course, there's a dark side to all of this, and there's also massive disruption as well. I'll give you an example: the digital divide. Okay, that was a thing that we came up with back then in the 90s, and I said there's a danger we'll create a world of digital haves and have-nots who become knowers and know-nots and doers and do-nots and people who can communicate with the rest of the world and those that can't. And if we do this, we'll create a structural underclass and some wounds in society that are hard to heal. So since I wrote that like 20 years ago, what, 1.5 billion people have come onto the internet, and they're not coming onto the internet in the developing world because of the one laptop per child or something like that. Although bless Nicholas Negroponte for the wonderful thing that he did. They're coming on because of mobility. So my family was in the Samburu land in Kenya, and on one of these safaris, and we met a goat herder, 14-year-old goat herder, who didn't have water. She drank goat's milk. She didn't have electrical power, but she had a mobile device that could pull up a browser. Now, she's 14, she's pregnant with her second child, married to somebody in his 60s who has no idea what this thing is, who's kind of threatened by it. So what kind of cognitive dissonance is going on in her mind about what's going on in my world? And you can point, that's a single example. And we could talk all day about all kinds of huge disruptions and calamity, and the newspaper I alluded to the problems of the old models of informing ourselves collapsing. But overall, to me, the arc of history is a positive one. And it's towards, overall, with all kinds of disruption, it's towards openness, it's towards prosperity. And to me, we've got the most powerful platform ever for creating wealth, for transparency, for scrutinizing our institutions, companies, governments everywhere becoming naked. And sunlight is a fabulous disinfectant everywhere. It's taking time, but everywhere institutions are having to get buff. If you're going to be naked, you better be buff, as we said. Fitness is no longer an option. And by buff, you need to have good value, but you also need to have these values of integrity as part of your bonus, because if you don't, you're unable to build trust. And increasingly, I may be naive, but I think that integrity is on the rise overall as an arc in the world. This old thing from the corporate social responsibility people. Remember this meme, you do well by doing good. Now, I don't think that was true. I think lots of companies did well by being really bad, by being monopolies, or having terrible labor practices in the developing world, or externalizing their costs on society, or by treating their employees bad, by focusing purely on marketing rather than innovation. But now I think that's starting to become true. We know for sure that you do badly by being bad. Wall Street found that to be true. So overall, I'm not an optimist. I'm more of, I like to think of myself as a researcher, basically. And notwithstanding all the disruption, I think that all of this is moving in the right direction.
I'd like to throw another analogy. This is about trains. In China right now, they've built several high-speed trains in record time. And in the United States, we've taken years to talk about building trains. And at the same time, our subway systems are not very close to the efficiency of those trains. So I'm wondering, even though these revolutions seem to be starting in the United States, what are your thoughts about how other countries, when they use these technologies to deal with these deal with these collaborations, that they believe they will be able to move faster than we can on using them?
Well, if by that you mean can developing countries leapfrog over previous stages that the developed countries have gone through or are going through, the answer is obviously yes. And you see it's like uneven and combined development in the world where you have big explosive and very positive movements. I mean, there are reasons that we don't have proper transportation systems in North America, and they have to do with the industrial age and the automobile industry and the oil industry that had a strong material interest in preventing that from occurring. In Macrowikinomics, there's a chapter on rethinking on transportation systems, actually. And it starts off with this little thought experiment. Okay, I'll do it right here. Imagine you have landed on a planet similar to Earth in its development 100 years ago, and your assignment is to design the dominant mode of transportation for the population of this planet. Here are your design criteria. Use as much fuel as you possibly can. Use as much arable land of the planet as you possibly can. Pump the maximum number of toxins into the environment. Kill or maim as many people as possible. Hint, make every pilot an amateur. You know, it goes through just all these designs. I mean, the internal combustion engine automobile, don't get me wrong, I love my car, but is a bizarre sort of concept with retrospect in terms of a way of moving us around. Well, now again, burning platform, we have to start to rethink this. Now, the way it's going to work out is we're not going to get rid of all highways and have big trains. The way it will work out is with intelligent transportation systems, where we'll have all kinds of hybrid models that will hopefully externalize fewer costs onto society, and will be more efficient in their use of resources, will kill less people, and will be a more rational transportation system. Yes?
Let me give you a reference. The Biomimicry Institute, which collects information about biomimicry to aid in technology, I was on their site a couple of years ago and thought that I'd look at what they have in terms of intelligence. And there are about 285, as I recall, biomimicry ideas applied to intelligence and organization. So if you haven't looked at that resource, I would suggest that you do. Let me push back a little bit on the difference between the generations and communication. I'm 62, so I come out about the same time period. And I would do my homework in front of the television. So, and it, you know, so that would be a little bit like having another screen open. And I noticed a difference between the way that I looked at television and the way that my parents looked at television. So for instance, when the live show of Lee Harvey Oswald being killed in the Texas police station came on, I was the person who noticed that. My parents, my grandparents, who were also watching, didn't. And they were surprised and pleased that I noticed that I could see that where they didn't. And I remember as a kid looking at television and saying, there are all these images of different sexuals, men and women. And I would actually count when I'm 8 or 10 how many women appeared and how many men appeared. And so there's different things that are going on, but they're not so different than I think the generation coming up. Now for the generation coming up, recently Occupy did Occupy Standing, and they did it in collaboration with 350.org. And
if you go to the Occupy site, it has a link to 350.org. You press on the link and it's 404. It's not there. You go to 350.org and they have a link about Occupy and Hurricane Sandy, but it's to the Red Cross, and it doesn't tell you anything about how to collaborate. So we still have all of these different difficulties of actually putting the information together. And I'm not so sure that my brain is all that different than my niece's or my nephew's brain. And I'm not sure that all of the media that we have is appreciably different than the media that we have now.
Well, it may be true in your case, but for most people, it's not. I mean, I can't even read my email or listen to iTunes at the same time. And I think that my parents come up to me and they're just an anecdotal stuff to do. This one guy came up not too long ago. He said, how can my 14-year-old get A's when she does her homework and 5 other things? And so I asked him, well, does she really get A's? Is she a good kid? Does she get out? Is she fit? Does she have balance in her life? Does she have friends? He said, oh yeah, she's just great. And I said, well, the first thing is we're not talking about a problem. We're talking about something that's interesting. And the time that I spent with brain scientists, the best conclusion I can come to is she's not actually multitasking. She has better active working memory, and she has better switching abilities. And so she can hold on to that, move over to that, do this, and then come back and pick that activity up again. And this is a whole generation that's doing that. And there are all kinds of implications of this. I mean, one thing we ask the kids all around the world, when you're online, what are you doing? Working, learning, collaborating, or entertaining yourself, having fun? And everywhere, they had trouble answering the question. They'd say yes.
Yes.
Well, those are the same thing, aren't they?
Yeah.
So they sure weren't the same thing for me. When I was watching the Mickey Mouse Club, I was only doing one of those things. I was having fun and entertaining myself. Whereas today, work, learning, collaboration, having fun are the same thing for a whole generation. I think the kids have got it right. I mean, what are you doing today? Are you working or learning? You know, it's called knowledge work. It's the same activity. And then, you know, increasingly we work and learn through collaboration. And hopefully, you know, we're having fun too. So if you're really interested in this, it's a $4 million project summarized in Grown Up Digital. There's a ton of evidence. By the way, while I'm at it, this whole stereotype about kids, they don't give a damn. Youth volunteering is up year over year, 15 years in the United States and many OECD countries. They're the dumbest generation. Well, our measure of dumbness or intelligence is called the IQ. It's been going up year over year forever. SAT scores are at an all-time high. It's never been tougher to get into MIT. Kids are graduating all around the world from university like never before. Now, to be really frank about this, the top third are great. The middle third are not too bad compared to previous generations, better. The bottom third are dropping out of school. But, you know, there's people like Mark Bearline that blame the internet for that. I mean, there are real problems with the bottom third. They're coming from single-parent families. The mom doesn't have time to talk to the kids, let alone to work with them on their homework if she were so inclined. There's an old model of pedagogy. The kids are bored. There's all kinds of inner-city bad stuff with you know, gangs, and kids are coming to school hungry. This is not a failing of the internet. It's a failing of public policy. It's a failing of society. And you know, to blame the internet is kind of like, well, I said in the book, blaming the library for ignorance. That the web's not the problem; it's part of the solution. And it's not about technology; it's about a change in the relationship between the student and the teacher in the learning process.
As long as you're on that subject, I wonder if you make a comparison for it. I think it's a common perception, maybe I'll exaggerate one of it. Our university system, both public and private, is the envy of the world. In large measure, I think that's true. You send the children here, to go, etc. And our K-12 system is a large measure disgraceful. There's a view that way anyway. Again, I'm exaggerating the point. You were getting to that point in that sort of third at the bottom. But how would you, can you, one, differentiate the causes of that, or maybe what our expectations should be, and secondly, how it does compare with the rest of the world? Okay.
Well, there are people in this room that would have more complete data. But K-12 is a big problem in the United States. And I was just in Wisconsin with a bunch of educators. Class sizes there are going to 50. Now, when you have 50 kids in a grade 6 class, you're into the industrial model. I mean, you're not even a transmitter of data. You're more a custodian, and a supervisor. And it's really hard to have self-paced, interactive, collaborative learning when you have that. Now, if you have a smaller class size, you actually don't even need much technology. My son went to Amherst College, 8-to-1, student teacher ratio. He's got a Pulitzer Prize winning history prof who took a real interest in it and then spent a lot of one-on-one time with it. But when you say the universities are the envy of the world, the top universities are the envy of the world, but there are lots of universities that aren't that great too. Like Amherst or the Ivies or MIT, schools like this. So they are absolutely the greatest schools in the world. And like being a Canadian, it's talk about envy. I mean, if you're a smart kid in Canada, just like in the US, you always try and go to the toughest place to get into. And in the United States, out of high school, you've got the Ivy League schools, you've got great technical schools like MIT, you've got, and then you have the little Ivies. Amherst College has an endowment of $1.4 billion with 1,500 students. But in Canada, you don't have any of that. Really, what you've got is the hardest places to get into are the undergraduate finance and commerce schools, Queen Commerce, McGill Commerce, the Ivy School of Western. So all the smartest kids end up being 20 years old studying accounting. And I've talked to so many kids who figured, this is terrible, I got trained, I didn't really get an education. So that's just a little Canadian angle on this whole thing. We're going to run out of time, and I wanted to tell you a story to sort of make the point, but I saw another hand sort of anxiously waving around.
I had a question about your thoughts on place. Some of your comments about collaboration over distance seem to kind of dissolve the notion of place and distance. And I was thinking that there's been such reinvestment in cities in the last few decades and really recognizing the value of clusters and having innovation hubs, people coming together physically. How do you reconcile the two? Like the digital information age is still having this great importance, having physical people coming together in the same room at the same time.
I don't see a conflict. I see endless opportunity. It's true, cities are becoming more important. In fact, if you look at the world, there's a disintermediation that's happening where we need stronger global problem-solving governments, these new models that I was talking about. But the world is all coming into cities, and cities are where we live and where we eat and where we have children and so on. So now, having said that, there are opportunities to reinvent just about every aspect of the city. And in North America, again, we did a terrible job designing cities. After the Second World War, we separated where you work and where you live and where you shop. And we didn't listen to Jane Jacobs, who was saying we need density. Because when you have density, you get, first of all, people can walk around, or they can move around more easily, and you get communities, you get people taking responsibility for things. So you go downtown in some of these cities, Atlanta, and after 6 o'clock at night, it's like a ghost town. It's a dangerous place to be. So the European model would have made a lot more sense. I was just in Dubai last week, and what a missed opportunity that was. You're building a city from scratch, you have all the money in the world. You ought to go and hire the best city planners and think about the networks and so on, and building a new 21st century city. You didn't do that. So you're driving along in the desert, there's a skyscraper. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. But when it comes to learning, which is kind of what we were talking about before, there's a role for the physical place. I mean, this is a pretty high bandwidth kind of situation that's hard to replicate. And there's a lot to what Marvin Dressler said about the physical campus being a place where young people can go and interact and get older and do that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, the web provides these endless opportunities to rethink, how we deliver content, who you can get access to in the world. I mean, why would you have somebody standing up giving you a lecture about Peter Drucker when you can go and interact with Peter Drucker in real time? Peter Drucker. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. So it's a time of opportunity. I think we're supposed to end about now. So let me just tell you this story to make the point. And this is in the spirit of provoking. So I was at Florida State University, and they have $1 billion fundraise. They're trying to position themselves as the world's first 21st century university. So they brought me in for a long lunch with the president and the deans and some academics, 25 people, to basically have a conversation, pick my brain about what does that university look like. So you got a little taste of my view today, and I presented that. And then they said, great, let's have a discussion. So one of the deans turns to a guy in the room named Joe, and he's a 22-year-old senior graduate. And he says, Joe, you're the only student here. Let's start off with your point of view. What did you think about what Don just said? And Joe says, well, I've been sitting here thinking about it, and actually it's resonating with me. And something I hadn't really considered. I think as a generation we do learn differently. Let me give you an example. I don't read books. Now the look in the room is sort of the look in this room. He says, I think I'm knowledgeable, but I don't really read books. I mean, I go on the web and I've got pretty good DS detectors. I know how to authenticate and scrutinize and where to find good sources. If I need to know what's in a book, I can go to Google Books and I can get a chapter. And I'm pretty good at figuring out what's the right chapter to get to understand someone's thesis. And if I have to actually read a book from beginning to end, I don't follow somebody else's narrative. I'm in the index, I'm in the table of contents, I'm out on the web, I'm coming back. He says, I don't read books. And so the dean of the film school, it's a famous film school, sitting beside me, he says, well, Joe, that was very interesting. I don't know if that's exciting or if it means the end of civilization. So we got into this amazing conversation. They were challenging all kinds of fundamental things about pedagogy and the nature of the university and the relationship to the institute. I was very happy. And so at the end, we all stand up, and I go over to Joe. I said, that was real interesting what you said. I'd like to explore that a bit. I'd like to get to know you. Could I interview you? And because I was just finishing up a grown-up digital. And he said, well, I don't think so. I got to go. I'm going to Fort Lauderdale. I said, perfect. You can come with me, because they give me a plane for the day. So we hitch a ride to Fort Lauderdale. I'm sitting there interviewing in the plane. And I said to him, tell me about yourself. He says, what do you want to know? I said, well, first of all, what kind of student are you? He says, I'm a good student. I said, how good? He says, well, 4.0. I mean, I've always had A's. And I said, oh, do you do anything else here at the university besides being a student? And he says, well, yeah, I mean, I'm the president of the Students' Council, have been for 2 years. I'm on 18 committees. I chair 12 of them, and I've got a $14 million budget. And that takes some time. And I said, well, he said, you do anything else? He says, well, the usual intramural sports stuff. I like that. He says, I guess the big thing would be that my girlfriend is from New Orleans, and when Katrina hit, we went down there to see what we could do. And there was no healthcare clinic in the 9th Ward, the devastated area, so I set one up. And I said, set up a healthcare clinic? He says, yeah, you have the internet, you can do anything. You need an air conditioner, you can get an air conditioner. I said, wow, I mean, what happened? He says, it's great, it's still functioning. It's called the 9th Ward Healthcare Clinic. It sees 9,000 patients a year. And I said, that's good too. I said, tell me about your family. And he sighs. And he says, and I realize I picked something sensitive here. He said, in the last year, both my parents died. One got sick and the other was in an accident. I said, geez, I'm so sorry, Joe. And I said, do you have siblings? He says, yeah, I'm the eldest, too. And so it's my job to keep the family together. And I said, well, do they live here? He said, no, they're in Lauderdale. And I said, well, how do you keep the family together when you're not there? And he says, well, we're on the web all day long, and texting. He says, you know, the best thing I found is we created a guild in World of Warcraft, and we go slay dragons together as a family. And it's so great. And it's pretty cool. I said, what are you doing next year? He says, well, I'm going to London. I'm doing a master's degree, and I'm so excited because I'm going to have a British healthcare system. He said, we just never had healthcare as a kid. We just never went to the doctor. And I said, wow, that's great. What are you studying? He says, I'm doing a master's in philosophy, and I'm really excited. I'm going to Oxford. I said, wow, I'm going to Oxford. Oxford and Cambridge for a master of philosophy, the two hardest places in the world. And I said, it's wonderful. I mean, did you get some financial aid? Because I knew he was poor. And he says, yeah, I got this great scholarship. It covers everything. And I said, cool, where'd that come from? He says, well, it's called a Rhodes Scholarship. The Rhodes Scholar from Northern Florida, 2008, doesn't read books. So Bob Dylan, there's something going on here, and we don't know what it is. I mean, and these forces are coming together. We're really tectonic. You got the web, you got the first generation, and they are different. I think there's a lot of evidence that speaks to that. And you've got the social thing. You've got profound changes to the architecture of our institutions, bumping up against the old industrial model. And this is finally happening. So this is a new paradigm. And when you get one of these, you get a leadership crisis. Because paradigms are a mental model. They put boundaries around what we think they constrain our actions. They're often based on assumptions that are so strong we don't know that they're there. The Earth is at the center of the universe. Paradigm. Big problem in the world is communism. Remember that one? The purpose of computing is to automate existing business processes with the goal of reducing headcount. And something can happen in art, science, culture, technology, whatever, that causes a shift to occur. And when that happens, these new paradigms cause dislocation or conflict and confusion and uncertainty. They're nearly always received with coolness or worse, mockery, hostility, vested interests fight against change. I mean, Galileo had a rough life trying to convince the church that the Earth wasn't at the center of the universe. Do you know when he was exonerated? It was like, what, 20 years ago? The Pope said, yep. The world is not flat, and we are not at the center of the universe. So leadership is a huge challenge. In the old model, V. Iacocca, Jack Welch, great visionary, sells a vision down. That's one thing Sanjay was right about. The person at the top can't learn for the organization as a whole. And so I think that this, again, is something that gives me great hope, because leaders can come from anywhere. And now with these new collaborative tools, they're being called for it all over the place. And leadership is not the old, I have a great vision. It's about collective intelligence and about new collaborative models of leadership. So it's a time when we each get to participate now. And the way that I've, just to finish, I've been describing this, is that the old media was this controlled, one-way model. Freedom of the press. Somebody said it's a great idea, especially if you own a press. But the new model it's the antithesis. It's not one-to-many. It's one-to-one. It's many-to-many. It's highly distributed. It's not centralized. People are active everywhere. They can participate like never before. And this will be what we want it to be. And if we want it to be a platform to find a cure for cancer, or a galaxy zoo to discover the heavens with 275,000 amateur astronomers, or we want it to be a platform to rethink the whole model of higher education, it will do that. If we want it to be a tool to organize against public education, as some people in the Tea Party think should be done, it will be that. So my bottom line on all of this, just getting back to the point about optimism, is that I'm hopeful there are more good people than bad people, and that but each of us has a responsibility to bring our legitimate aspirations and expectations to the table to do that. If we do that by the hundreds of millions, then this network intelligence age will be one where promise is fulfilled and peril is perhaps unrequited. So, thank you very much.